Thank you so much for attending today's webinar hosted by Canary Media. The webinar is titled The Grid Edge Opportunity, Building Resilience Through Decentralization. My name is Lindsay Cherry. I'm the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for 9 Energy. We're an energy storage developer based out of New York City, where we develop, own, and operate community-scale batteries, so front-of-the-meter distribution connected storage. I want to go over a few housekeeping rules before I introduce our lovely panelists today. There is going to be a Q&A at the end of this presentation. At the end of this discussion. So we try to leave about 10 to 15 minutes for audience Q&A. You will find the Q&A function on the top right of your screen. So please feel free to, ask questions throughout the conversation, and we will get to those at the end. So now I'm excited to introduce our panelists, each of whom brings their own unique perspective on this topic today. So I will start off by introducing Ren. Ren Wright is General Manager of Residential Flex at Kraken. Kraken's Residential Flex allows utilities and energy customers to use their residential assets to get the cheapest, greenest energy available. Customers can effortlessly charge their cars and heat their homes at the cleanest, most affordable times, fully automated by Kraken to maximize savings and sustainability. Kraken's smart demand management already has over 500,000 devices connecting, helping British EV drivers save hundreds of pounds a year compared to standard charging. Next up is Brad Matson, who is co-founder and chairman of Husk Power Systems, helping to provide solutions on global energy poverty. Husk Power is a market leader in deploying 100% renewable mini-grid technology to provide reliable 24/7 power to communities with little or no access to electricity. The company has a significant goal to deploy 10,000 mini-grids by 2030, aiming to address critical energy access and transition challenges. Last but not least, of course, is Shannon Anderson, who is part of Solar United Neighbors. We'll call them SUN. And she is the Power Plant Policy Director. And in this role, Shannon directs SUN's policy and advocacy work to advance distributed power plants across the country, providing technical and policy recommendations to utility regulators and lawmakers in multiple states, Puerto Rico, DC, to help ensure this program succeeds. So now that we've finished up those introductions, I want to just dive right into the questions we have for our panelists, because I think we'll have some robust discussion. So Ren, first question is for you. What evidence do you have that providing these flex services that Kraken has been working on really results in the shifting of peak demand?
Yeah. So good morning, good evening, good night to everyone all around the world. So here at Kraken, we manage, we have about 400,000 assets that we manage on any given day, which equates to around 2.5 gigawatts of power. And what that means, there's about 350 plus thousand homes that we're looking at, and we see on average 42% of the home load being able to be shifted during peak times. So we're seeing this evidence today. It's actually happening. We are live in 10 countries, so we're seeing this replicated over and over again as more consumers move to more smart tariffs or flexibility services. Oh, Lindsay, I do think that you're on mute.
Cool. I promised I wouldn't do that, and I did. Thank you so much, Ren. Great response. And Shannon and Brad, obviously, please feel free to jump in case you have, any input as well. So Shannon, I know you have a lot of work you do a lot of work on designing programs. So I was curious if you could maybe highlight some of the most important regulatory or market changes needed to unlock some of these residential DER aggregations at scale. Can you kind of walk us through those needs?
Yeah, sure. So thanks so much for having me, and just great to join this conversation about the future of the grid and where we can go together with distributed energy. So we're really excited at Sun about making sure customers are fairly compensated for the value that they bring to the grid. So I'd say fair compensation is really the most important critical thing to get right in program design. And that includes making sure that resources are valued for everything they bring, things. So thinking about capacity, distribution value, and then really, again, sort of thinking about that value as an aggregation service as well that scales as resources get bundled together. We're also really thinking a lot about open access and technology neutral programs, which are really important because that allows ultimate customer choice. So making sure that it's not just one battery type in a program, not just one kind of thermostat, really allowing customers to kind of bring the devices that they already have at their homes into these programs. Because if we're not able to like bring everything together, we're leaving a lot of value on the table. And then the last piece that we really focus on is scalability. So at Sun, we believe that the days for pilot programs on aggregated DERs is over. Really, we know we can scale these programs really fast. We've seen this in action in California and Puerto Rico and Texas over just last year. And so we want to see programs designed that really think about that growth and meet that opportunity.
Fantastic, Shannon. And I feel like you bring a lot of the US perspective as well. And I want to kick it over to Brad and see how do we kind of transition these conversations. Brad works a lot for our audience. Brad works a lot in India. So, you focus on, other countries that maybe have less access or reliable electricity. So how does this calculus change when you are working in those types of markets, Brad?
Yeah, as a private developer in a market where you're running against the grid, right? A national grid in this case, regulatory framework is probably the most number one priority. We determine where we want to work, in which countries and which geographies in those countries. And it's much more basic than you might find in America, because in our case, we're also providing electricity through mini grids and through C&I deployments. And what we need to be able to do is make a profit. We can't do it and losing money all the time. Our competitor, which is the grid, loses money. In most every country in Africa, the grids lose money every year. Some of them are completely insolvent. But as a private player, you can't find investors if you lose money. So we need to be able to set what they call cost reflective tariffs. You need to be able to charge a tariff that covers your costs. It's as basic as that. So in our case, the regulatory framework that allows us to operate and do it at a profit is really, really key. But there's other issues in the regulatory world besides just tariff setting. There's also the risk when you have investors that are putting assets. It's an asset-heavy business. We're building, generating assets. So if the grid then comes in and says, okay, we'll do that for you now, you need to have some compensation mechanism. So when the grid arrives, you don't have these stranded assets at risk. So that's very key too. And then something is at the residential level as basic as net metering. You don't find that everywhere. And so then how can you have homeowners be willing to invest in, residential solar if you don't have the regulatory environment that allows them to do that and believe they have a long-term asset that's going to make sense? So it's simple. So some of the things that have been resolved in markets like the United States or in Europe are unresolved in either Africa or India. So it's really basic issues of making it a viable business for you and your customers.
Those are all absolutely great points, Brad, and really appreciate you bringing this other perspective. I feel like we have a very well-rounded group today. And Ren, so kicking it back to you, I'm curious if you can make this a little bit more tangible to us. Can you describe a real-world deployment where residential assets have delivered a grid service, and what lessons have you learned from that? Can you make it a little real for us?
Yeah, so we partner with utilities to be able to provide smart tariffs or flexibility tariffs, and then power what we want to be flexibility programs. And I'll go back a bit on what Shannon said. She really talked in a good way about we have to get out of the mode of pilots and think about this long term. And the way to do that from our perspective is to be very customer centric. So I'm sure that a lot of people who are on tonight could talk about flex and assets and solar for hours. And we all could nerd out about this, and it would be really fun for us. But I always think about my mom. when I think about making these types of programs and flexibility successful, because my mom is lovely, but she's not very technically savvy across the board, but she owns an EV and she has a solar and Powerwall. And I think about her when we think about flexibility, because at the end of these DERs are human beings. And so we have to make, again, Shannon said, you have to have fair compensation, but it has to be simple. If we're actually going to scale up to the millions of assets that we'll need to connect to be able to shift load and make meaningful change to the grid, things need to be simple. They need to be easy to understand and easy to use. So what we've seen across all the programs that we do and across all the countries, the utilities who succeed are the ones who start simple and then grow from there, and they truly understand what their customers want. The ones who struggle overanalyze and don't know the data, but they kind of make it for the early adopters versus the mass market. And that's really what we need to get to, or this flex movement, I'll say, will be just a memory if we can't get this right from a mass market perspective, which is a massive risk for us long term.
Yeah, or they ignore the customers or go in the opposite direction of their customers.
That's also true. It's also true. And I think that's something that everybody needs to think about. I think we talked about this previously. You have the DERs, the distributed energy resources, but there's human beings attached to all of this. So I think I heard someone say once CERs, consumer energy resources, which I love as a concept, because it really is about the people. And the energy consumption has changed so much over the last 10 years specifically, 20, but probably 10 years specifically. And we have an opportunity to change that on an individual level, which I think people are really engaged with. But again, it has to be simple. My mom needs to understand it without needing to know everything.
Yeah.
Lindsay, I'd like to build on Ren's point there, because if I had there's two big topics that affect everything we do with DERs, and we do them across the board, by the way. We do residential, we do mini grids, we do commercial and industrial power plants. And the key thing is the difference between being project-centered and thinking about B2B business versus customer-centric. Ren is exactly on target. It's a profound change for a 100-year-old energy business that in many cases you do think doesn't care about the customer or doesn't think about they're in here in California, you're right, we're ratepayers. We're not customers. We're just people that have to pay these rates. They call us ratepayers. They don't even call us customers.
I know, it is a rather dehumanizing term now that I think about it.
So I mean, this customer centricity is huge. And then the other one that's a theme when you're talking about DERs is the fact that you have to do, instead of a few gigawatt power plants, you have to do thousands or millions of small energy resources. And so the use of AI, the use of technology, the use of so many things that you don't find in typical utilities is paramount. So customer centricity and using technology to enable you to do thousands or millions of projects simultaneously, both develop them and manage them, as Ren's doing, right? But also just developing that many projects is key. So the industry isn't used to it. It's a profound change.
I entirely agree. It really takes a huge shift from so many different angles, just like, disrupting the way we even think about ratepayers, and I want to, pull on this thread a little bit more and talk about how we're bringing people along. So Ren, you mentioned your mother, who's not the most tech savvy. I can relate to that. And, I feel like there are different groups that we need to make sure come along with this energy transition. And I think a big piece of this puzzle is energy equity. And Shannon, I want to kick it over to you to understand a little bit, how do you incorporate these the concepts of equity into residential programs that you're pushing for? Is that, part of your process?
Yeah, definitely. So equity is a core piece of what SUN strives to achieve within a program. We believe, the SUN is for everyone, and it should be affordable and available for everyone, regardless of their economic status or where they live. And so we're really focused on designing programs that, again, have that fair compensation piece, but then also incorporate energy equity into designing that compensation. So thinking through additional incentives that could be available for income qualified families, thinking through even maybe how you build in community resilience centers and like nonprofit community service providers into a program. So thinking through, community needs and how you meet those needs through distributed energy resources. There's a lot of ability to do that. And, we're lucky to have, state programs and local programs that recognize the value of energy equity across the country. But there needs to be more, certainly, to make sure these programs do, in fact, really benefit the people that are struggling with energy costs and affordability, because that's the key piece here, is to make sure these programs really help, bring down rates for everyone, but especially those that have that highest energy burden.
Yeah, absolutely correct. I feel like energy affordability is just on the tip of everyone's tongue these days. It is going to be one of the biggest issues in every election, every upcoming election. So really appreciate that perspective, Shannon. Brad, I'm curious, besides, some of the regulatory limitations you were talking about earlier, what are some of the other like really big barriers that you face in your work? What are the things that you see as one of the biggest hurdles to overcome for DERs?
Yeah, it's a very target-rich environment discussing that, because as I was mentioning earlier, when you have a 100-year-old industry that's been going on its merry way with centralized power resources, it's very difficult when you want to democratize that, make energy available for everybody. And there's a loss of power. There's a lot of systems and places and frameworks. One of the biggest ones, maybe it's more peculiar to the way I'm looking at it right now, is we have quite a few companies like us that are developing energy systems, DERs, all through the world. And one of their biggest limitations actually is getting funding to do that work. People are, let's say, investors that invest in energy are used to investing in, give me a dam or a nuclear power plant or a gigawatt solar field or a solar farm. I mean, these are gigawatt billion-dollar projects. They're used to investing in huge projects, but they don't invest in a 10 kilowatt array for a home, or they don't invest in 100, even a 1 megawatt is small. So the issue is the entire ecosystem doesn't have a good way to do financing for DERs. They can finance big things, but they can't finance lots of small things. So you have to change to kind of a portfolio approach to financing. You have to finance thousands of projects at a time, which isn't easy to do. And there's sometimes even no mechanism. So you find that there's a huge gap between the literally $50 billion need to be deployed to DERs versus what's being deployed today, which is less than $1 billion. So it's a huge gap that, it's a capital intensive industry, and so if you want to do DERs and do a lot of them, you have to find ways to deploy that capital. And it's not as easy. So I think the whole funding mechanism that allows developers to put in place these thousands of DERs around the world has a hole in it from a financing point of view.
I'm curious, Ren or Shannon, do you see that as well in the work that in this particular segments you're in?
Yeah, well, I would just add, as we just had a bill that happened this summer in the US, some of you may have heard about it. There's going to be some challenges going forward with kind of the financing and the affordability of home-based rooftop solar and battery storage. So we're looking forward to additional opportunities and just sort of the creativity of the industry to come to play, which I think will happen through third-party ownership models, additional leasing options. There's still a lot of value to be had for home-based residential storage and solar. And so we're hoping, there's still quite a bit of opportunity there. I mean, it is still the fastest, easiest, most affordable, resource on the planet. And we're here in 2025 and, we've got to get megawatts online, gigawatts online, as Brad said, really soon to meet demand and meet our climate goals. So, I think the funding community will come on board. And again, we've seen this industry grow exponentially over time. And this is just going to be the latest iteration of it.
Lindsay, just to put a point on that, if you look at the current LCOE, the cost of energy for doing some residential work, you'll find there are millions and millions of people that would lower their monthly bill today, tomorrow, if they had solar. Or they should also have batteries in many cases. But the one thing that stops them is you have to pay for all that upfront, right? So the difficulty is you're paying for 20 years of energy on day one, and then there's no fuel after that. So it's kind of free after that. Sun is free. But then you have to find a way to pay for that in the very beginning. And a lot of people just can't afford to do it. And in the markets we're in, it's a lot worse, of course. People don't have the money. They're still just getting along with basic life necessities, let alone putting in a solar array. So yeah, even at the large level, businesses can't afford it. But at the home level, even if it makes sense economically, you just got to come up with the ability to write that check.
I think it's also, there's many ways to approach this problem of affordability. And the way that I'm looking at it a lot of times with utilities is looking at the full value chain. So not all these things need to be very separate, the purchase of a car, the introduction of solar. If utilities can look at the full value chain, they can start to create more meaningful offers to their end users that actually benefit them long term. There is so much grid stability that needs to be focused on in the United States for sure, but that's also happening across Europe as well. That is going to become a big ticket item in the next couple of years, if not already today. And so thinking about this holistically and partnering with solar providers, heat pump providers, EV car manufacturers, and creating really compelling offers is the way that we need to look at this if we're trying to think about it from a residential or more of an individual perspective. And what we've done with one of our utilities here in Europe is actually support them in creating an offering where the lease of your vehicle plus the charging of your vehicle is all included in one couple £100 price on a monthly basis. And that all of a sudden means that you can buy an EV and you can charge it at home and your energy just got cheaper and it got greener and you don't have to think too much about it because it's a simple price as it's all included. And those types of offers will get people on board. There's this natural tendency of buying something new and different, EV, solar, heat pumps, etc. Once you get people there with these kind of simple understandings, it's quite easy to pull through that value on what it's going to give you long term. So
I think Ren brings up a very important point. You got to think about different business models than old traditional, and so the new models involve leasing and involves packaging and involves bringing these services together in a way and making it affordable. So I think we overcome some of the financing limitations by being really clever with business models. But I have to admit, probably the entrenched, the status quo people don't come up with the most innovative business models. So it's other companies like Ren's company and Shannon's work that are coming up with the business models we need.
Yeah, I think that just to touch back on the sun is I think someone in the Q&A might have asked this question about the pilots into programs. This is the type of stuff that we're talking about, these kind of small innovation. Oh, we're going to do this small pilot. When we think about programs, it's really the changing mind of people and saying it's not going to be a 1,000 asset program that will run over the summer as a trial that's partially funded. This is going to become a business as usual thing. So every single customer who has solar doesn't need to sign up. It's actively available at all times. And so I do think the pilots have definitely served their purpose because they've taught us things, but we have spent many years doing pilots now. And I think I won't speak for Shannon, but my feeling, and I assume that she's going to agree, is that we're ready to get into that business as usual piece. And we are seeing that with our utilities at Kraken, that those who are committed to making these things business as usual are just really knocking it out of the park, which is really exciting. And that's a change we need to see across the board.
Shannon, do you want to add anything to what Ren said, or are you just in full agreement?
Yeah, full agreement for sure. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing these programs just scale up exponentially. I just saw a stat from Analytics this morning that, virtual power plant growth in the US in the residential market was 229% growth just year over year. We work, Sunworks in Puerto Rico, and that program in particular has scaled from 38 megawatts last year to 500 this year. 81,000 customers in that program now. So, if you have a utility that's on board, really sees the value, maybe has done that testing, knows how it works, is able to, trust the third-party aggregators, the tech companies, and the customers, again, that end user human at the end of this, at the end of the day, and know that they're going to deliver for you. You're able to design a program that really thinks about that scale and uses that program in a way that is going to really help the grid. So that's what we're looking for is, again, those utility partners that are willing to think bigger and think about designing programs that really are going to solve problems that we're all facing.
And I think Brad, you're the one that said this, but it's difficult to shift this entrenched, electricity system that we've had for the last 100 years, and utilities are not known for being the most dynamic. I'm curious, how do you go about kind of like shifting their mindsets and bringing them along and showing them the value that these systems really have to offer?
Quite honestly, we haven't done that hard work. We've mostly avoided them. In India, we work alongside the utilities. We actually have our own T&D infrastructure, so there'll be a utility pole on our pole because they don't have great systems, and they haven't yet really embraced PPPs, public-private partnerships yet.
Mm-hmm.
In other countries where that's happening, for example, our work in Nigeria, we have worked historically independently, so we don't even tie the utilities. We just have to get their permission to operate. But we're now doing one what we call an integrated mini grid, where we have a grid. It's about a 1 megawatt grid that's tied to the utility, and so we have to really work with them very closely. And it's really easy in that case because it's a self-interest for them. Mm-hmm. They have huge collection problems and huge line losses, and so they're very inefficient. They lose as much as 30% of their energy. Wow. And we lose close to zero. So we have a smart metering where we have a meter at every single site. We control everything very closely. So we actually solve a problem they have in terms of collections. And also, of course, they have a lot of irritated customers that don't have reliable energy, and we give them 99% uptime versus about 80% what they get now. So because we make their customers happy and we solve kind of a problem they have, then we expect it to work out well. But that's a new relationship. We just I guess we've now gotten big enough where we can't avoid the utilities anymore. So we're learning how to work with them, but we're just at the beginning of that journey.
Yeah,
I think if you don't mind me jumping in as well, there's two things that come to mind with that question. The first is that change needs to happen. Like, we are going to see over 200 million assets or EVs, heat pumps, solar, battery come online by 2030 in Europe and the US. Like, that is going to fundamentally shift consumption, and it's going to put so much strain on the grids that we have today. So either people are going to have to spend a lot of money revamping the grid and bringing it up to speed, or they're going to have to find alternative solutions. They're probably going to have to do both at the exact same time. And so,
I have a question though. I agree with you 1,000%. Do the utilities you work with agree with you?
Yes.
Do they understand they need to make a change?
So yes, and so that's the first point, is that this has to happen, right? There are definitely people out there who are going to put their head in the sand and not resolve this, right? We have seen examples of that across the world, but it has to happen. It has to change. And so I think maybe, Brad, this is the time to actually start working with utilities, because they're in this nature of being forced into making these changes. So I think the first thing is it has to happen, so it will happen. And how we do that, we have to be the influencers on. And the second thing is, at Kraken, we're a software as a service company. We sell our flexibility service programs, our flexibility platform, and we also sell a CRM CIS platform. But the thing that makes us different, or the thing that I think it makes us really different, is that we also offer transformation. And it's actually not an offer, it's a requirement. When you come to us, we don't just say, here's some tech, good luck, have a great day. We bring everybody on the journey with us. We have an operating model that comes alongside our tech. We do transformation, we do training. It is a whole utility revamp almost, or transformation that gets us there. And so I think we have to think big picture. There are a ton of really wonderful companies solving pieces of the pie right now, and we have to work together and be able to partner with your own competitors sometimes to make it work, because we are, like Brad said, we are changing these big behemoths, but it has to be transformation. We can't think just tech is going to solve it. Tech is going to do a lot. It definitely is. It's going to modernize us in a great way, and that's really exciting, but there needs to be some transformational change that everybody has to be forced into a bit, and we'll figure out how to do that. But I think those are the two kind of things that jump to mind for me.
Well, and I love what Ren just said, because what I love most about this industry right now is the amazing innovation that's happening. There's just, really smart people committed to this work at a variety of different companies. And there's also a healthy level of competition going on. And that, of course, will drive down prices and just make that innovation even better and stronger. So, it's a great time, I think, to be thinking about this work and really, back to the kind of the utilities side of things. A lot of the time, what utilities want to do is they want to kind of do everything themselves. And what they don't have to do here is everything themselves, because there's, again, smart companies out there that they can partner with and work with that have already thought through all the design flaws, the tech side of things, the AI integration, weather modeling, all of those different pieces. And because there's already those companies out there that have invested their own resources and capital into these programs, the utilities and those of us, ratepayers, don't have to make that investment. So that's, I think, really great too, is that there's a variety of different companies out there operating that, again, are competing and just driving innovation in a really exciting way.
Yeah, I want to compare notes with Ren, because you have to obviously find the early adopters, right? We actually went out and created an index called the Country Attractiveness Index. And this is whether that country is attractive for DERs or not, based on their policies, based on their rates, based on, the everything that you might think about, the demographics in there. Are they ready? Do they have people willing to admit, oh, we do need some new technology? We have to look at this differently. And you're right, it's transformation. Are they ready for transformation? A lot of places aren't. Yeah. And so it's an interesting study to really look at what areas of the world are going to be the leaders in this transformation. And we're still trying to understand that.
Yeah, and I think nobody wants to be first in this space a lot of the times, and we've been very lucky to find a couple of firsts globally in our clients, especially within Octopus Energy. But that is a big thing, is finding that first group, because afterwards it's a point and prove and a reference. So we see this transformation not only in Flex, but also in just how utilities manage their own customers and manage their business. And so it is finding those first, and it's about making sure that you are aligned with those expectations. So that's why we require the transformation piece on our side as well. But not everyone's quite there yet, but that's okay. It really is, because someone has to be first, and it's okay. We'll find those people to go first.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And I kind of want to dovetail into something that Brad said, and talking, like, I'm curious to get your perspective in the markets that you operate in. Like, what is the appropriate role for DERs to play in the economies you've been working in? You talk a lot about how, there's much less electricity access, and I'm just curious, do you leapfrog over that? Like,
like telecom, basically. What happened is, it's amazing what happened in developing countries where cell phones changed the economy. It's incredible, where we just, okay, we're not going to put in the infrastructure for landlines. We just bypass, although there was quite a bit of cell phone towers going up everywhere around the world. But yeah, it's a leapfrog. And I think the same thing applies here when you talk about energy, where they don't have enough energy. The access is already low to begin with. And in some of these economies, their per capita energy consumption is 1/10 of that of the United States. So we think we have an energy issue now. Think about India needing 10 times as much energy. Almost no one has air conditioners in India. And then when you start converting that billion people economy over to all electric scooters and electric cars, as well as everyone will have an air conditioning, the power consumption numbers are enormous. So in that context, DERs can play an absolutely huge role, because why start wrong, like basically base everything on carbon-based energy and then convert it over? We have this big energy transition question. Don't transition, start with the DERs. And so the role could be enormous if you basically say DERs are more resilient to climate. They're better having the generation, close to the source. There's just so many ways it's more resilient and appropriate and even lower cost, that if we can put all the right conditions in place to drive DERs in these economies, they should be the major thing to begin with. And so let's not electrify these areas around the world with oil and gas. Let's start with DERs to begin with. So I think it's a huge opportunity.
Entirely agree. And I guess now, like, shifting it back to Ren and Shannon, I'm curious, which whoever wants to answer this, but can residential assets, substitute for traditional centralized infrastructure investments? And is there going to be kind of like a push and pull with the utilities? Because that's, of course, how they make their rate of return, is a lot of centralized infrastructure investment. So I'm curious to hear from you, what is how big of a role do you think your residential aggregation can play?
I'll go first, Shannon. Okay.
Yeah, I could start us off. So, so absolutely, decentralized resources that actually operate centralized, if that makes sense. So you have distributed energy resources, and then you operate them in a centralized manner, basically like a power plant, right? You're deploying them together to the grid, just like you would, a several 100-megawatt coal plant or a gas plant. And so that's, what these resources can really do for the grid. They can do everything that a traditional power plant can do. And so they can serve that role for the grid. And they have been serving that role, again, with major utilities around the country and around the world. So we know it works. And we know it, again, like, you scale it and it's just going to work more and more. And as more folks get solar and batteries and EVs and all of those devices, we know it can work at a higher scale as well. There's definitely that issue with utilities and that tension for them with their traditional business model. But there's creative ways to deal with that as well, through thinking through, rate making models that maybe are more performance based, setting some really good capacity goals for utilities to deploy distributed energy resources on their system. And once they meet those goals, there's some performance metrics that they meet and are able to get some, additional compensation for. There's also ways to really kind of think through just the role of the regulator in all of this, and what regulators can, I think, help push utilities to do. Utilities, they serve their customers. And if their customers want to be involved in these programs, then utilities should do these programs. That is a way to serve their customers. And it's a way to meet power needs of all their customers and save everybody money. So regulators should really, again, sort of encourage these programs and help utilities think a little bit bigger about them. And make sure that, that they're able to do them within their traditional business model, but that the business model doesn't hold them back either. And that, regulators shouldn't see that business model as a stumbling block to really deploying these programs at scale.
So I think that immediately this kind of residential focus of these DERs or CERs won't immediately replace all traditional infrastructure. I don't think that anyone on this call would say that. But I do see it as a shifting of the balance. And just like we saw renewables, large batteries, wind farms, et cetera, as those have come online and sort of taken away the traditional infrastructure, I see the residential side of that doing the same thing. So if you think of a pie chart, you slowly see it turn a bit more green and a bit more residential as things progress. I think there's a couple of ways of thinking about this as well. And Shannon kind of outlined it in the aggregator comment. So a lot of times folks get quite overwhelmed with, I have to manage 10,000 of these assets. You don't actually have to manage 10,000 of these assets. You need to understand the behavior of those 10,000 assets and manage them as one. And so there's an education piece that we need to do across the board. And even though we all talk about this all the time, it's good to have the repetition of, you actually think about these as kind of a large scale asset. They're just virtual or distributed, as the name suggests. But I think that, again, going back to the needing to do this is happening. It would be a colossal miss for us to not take advantage of all of these assets that are become available. So if every EV that's out there right now that's not being used in a program like this could potentially help the grid. So I think that is something that we need to look at, the missed opportunity cost of not doing these things, and not putting these programs together and make that, a forefront conversation of what is it going to cost for us to do this or not do it. You're missing it. You're actually missing money driving around at this point, or cost savings driving around or sitting on people's roofs every day. And so I think if we kind of twist that a bit in the conversation, it'll be quite helpful.
And I feel like, we talk about the extent of the opportunity available. I'm curious to hear, honestly, from each of you, where you see the biggest opportunities at the moment, like in the immediate term. Any hints we can give to the audience?
I'll go start. Mine is a little weird because it's not in the United States. So I'll start first. I actually see two is, as Shannon and Ren have been talking about it, there's a huge role for making this easier for the status quo by allowing aggregators to come on the scene and make these, thousands of distributed assets, these DERs, look like a big power plant they're used to dealing with. So if you really allow the aggregators, if you allow the virtual power plants to exist, and in many countries, we can't do that. You can't even do it yet. So we need help with the regulators to enable virtual power plants. So then we can simplify it for the utilities. We can look like a gigawatt asset. So I think that's a big opportunity in the developing world where virtual power plants don't yet exist. But I'd say short term for us, the biggest opportunity is really what has occurred recently in India, where you have the kind of the largest population in the world, and the government has decided that they cannot meet the needs through conventional energy sources. And so they put in a residential program that they're paying for basically about half of the cost to install residential solar. And so what you've created overnight, literally, and they've also done two other things. The regulators, they've required that you do net metering. If it's requested, you have to give it. And then they went to the banks and said, you have to give loans to people with they want, so they overcome both the regulatory hurdle and the financial hurdle with a 50% subsidy. They have created overnight a 100 gigawatt residential market. It is just an incredible opportunity, unlike I've seen anywhere around the world. You have Sunrun and Solar City, all the things that happen in the United States. This market has 4 to 5 times as many people. And another unique thing is almost all the rooftops are similar. They're flat concrete roofs. So the customization necessary in America, where you try to put it on every roof, is unique and different. Every roof is almost exactly the same. So you could actually have a solar product, a solar appliance that you can buy and plug in. So this is, I think, unlocked an amazing, huge opportunity for DERs. Obviously 100 gigawatt opportunity is pretty large.
No, that's absolutely astounding. And we love a standardized and replicable product.
Yeah.
Shannon, I'm going to shoot it
decades.
Shannon, what's your view on this?
Yeah, so I would say, the smart thermostat programs are really delivering. A lot of utilities have them. And so the next step is sort of like adding in battery storage to those programs. And that's happening across utilities now. And then the next stage after that is really electric vehicles. And that's, I think, a really interesting opportunity. EVs have bigger batteries. There's an ability to really use those resources for the grid. And then, you think about home EVs, and then you add in like electric school buses, which have even huger batteries, and, electric trucks and shipping. And so it's just, electrification is here, it's happening, regardless of what Congress thinks. It's going to keep happening. And, we just want to make sure that as customers adopt these resources, that the value that they can bring to the grid is realizing these programs. So again, I think utilities need to start, stop thinking about electric vehicles as a challenge and more as a solution and an opportunity.
I agree with everything that Brad and Shannon just said. And you said standardized and replicable was actually one of the things I wrote down. But so I guess I'll build a bit on what Shannon just said there. A big opportunity for us. I know we struggle potentially with convincing regulators, etc. But if we think about like a B2B aspect to all of this, working with manufacturers to make all of these devices that are coming online controllable. This is a really big step change that we could make that allows for many tech companies in the future, and also many companies who are startup, to be able to input on this. If we think about the kind of hardware and tech trajectory of V2G, I started my career in the EV industry, and we've been talking about V2G for 10, 12, 15, 20 years, if it depends on how long you've been in the industry. And it's finally here, and this is really exciting. But it took so long for us to get there. We need to figure out how to leapfrog that. And one of the things that we've done at Kraken is co-found the Mercury Consortium. So it's working with manufacturers and utilities to create a standard for this connectivity. If you think like Bluetooth, basically, for these assets. That, I think, is such a brilliant opportunity because it basically commoditizes this a little bit, and it allows for us to speed up. So there's not this, oh, well, these ones aren't applicable, we can't control these. If you actually think about the whole home long term, if we can control a lot, we can start optimizing the energy consumption in a way that benefits the customer but isn't event-based, and actually we can have more long-term impact on the grid.
I can confirm what Ren's saying there. We found this important enough that we actually built our own IoT device because ones on the market were too expensive. And we have to put it on not just a few devices, we have to put it on 100,000 things out there, right? Yeah. So every power plant we have, every device, every home has a smart meter. We have to have IoT. We have to track everything. And so IoT becomes Internet of Things, for those that don't know. Is so key. And then also obviously you need the software to link it all and use it intelligently. But we found it important enough that we actually built our own to make it happen faster and cheaper. With our markets, we have to be really low cost. So that's one of the reasons we did it.
Amazing. Well, I feel like this discussion has been really fantastic, but it's time for me to stop asking the questions and for me to now channel the audience questions. So, so for those still listening, please keep submitting questions, upvote the ones you would like answered, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before the end of this session. So one of our audience members says, very happy to hear the time for pilot programs is over. Can you please address the utilities that the utilities haven't got that memo yet? Is there any way for us to kind of encourage utilities to move beyond pilot programs and just kind of dipping your toes in rather? Going full force?
Yeah, well, I think one way is just through peer learning. So again, I mean, there's a lot of utilities that are doing this and doing it at scale and doing it very well. And they could, as Ren said, they're the early adopters, they're the leaders, and they can be peer leaders to other utilities. And then again, there's the important role of policymakers, legislators, regulators, making sure that utilities that maybe haven't gotten the memo yet, that they can get that memo through lawmakers as well through, we work on statewide legislation, we work at utility commissions, we, make sure that there's the regulatory and policy pieces in place to make utilities think bigger and better. So.
Awesome.
I'd like to build on that a little bit if I can. I think that what Ren has said is you pick the early ones and then make those success stories. I was building a plan for how we do DERs across Africa, and you have these recalcitrant regulatory bodies and governments. Sometimes it seems working against you. And the only solution we came up with is you have to find a success story and celebrate the heck out of it, because it almost might only be by embarrassing the other utilities that they're often going to get left behind. They're going to look like they're really in the Stone Ages, but you need winners, right? So Brad, go with your early guys, write up some stuff, get it in the New York Times, celebrate your successes with your partners in a very broadcast way. So this will, influence hopefully other utilities to take this step.
The New York Times, did you mean Canary Media?
Yeah. Sorry. Well, that too.
Brad got too excited.
Appreciate that. And so let's see, the next question is for Shannon. Shannon mentioned the need to value the full DER value stack. The customer only sees what shows on their meter power. New advanced inverters can dynamically deliver the higher values of capacity, frequency response, voltage support, wires alternatives, power factor correction, harmonic stability. Wow, it just keeps going. How do you monetize these additional values?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill, and it's happening, real time in your state of Colorado and others. So, it's a challenge, I think, again, to get utilities sort of out of the model that they've been operating in and thinking about these resources as providing that value that they seek in a new and different way, and also helping regulators understand that, because there certainly is a challenge with, again, like they know what it means for a power plant and big poles and wires and, all the things that we've had on the grid for a long time. But, to really kind of think about the dynamic distributed energy resources is a challenge. So I think it's going to take, some smart thinking. It's going to take economic modeling. It's going to be, we're going to build the boat as we're driving across the ocean to some degree. And again, thinking about those early adopters that are doing it right, exemplifying that. And then hopefully get, again, that's back to the standardization, similar to what we've done with just like energy export for solar, making sure that there's economic models that we can use that really do value all of these things and can put that before regulators and make the case. But yeah, it's going to take experts and lawyers and a whole lot of other pieces to really get that right.
And Ren, anything else to add to Shannon's response?
I think as always, Shannon covered it quite well.
Yeah.
I would say that, again, kind of going back to manufacturers, it's not just a single relationship anymore with the utility and the homeowner or the what was it called? The power rate?
Ratepayer.
Ratepayer, homeowner and the ratepayer anymore. It actually, as we've advanced and you have more kind of smart assets being EVs and solar, etc. There is actually a relationship that needs to start happening between the manufacturers and the utilities themselves. And so we see really great partnerships happening in Europe across with utilities, and then offering a EV discount if you then sign up with a specific utility, or it's a discount off of your installation. So there's this element of manufacturers have this big skin in the game. And if we're ignoring them, which I don't think everybody is ignoring them, but if we are not bringing them into the conversation and how they do this, then we're going to lose out a lot on this value.
Fantastic answer to those that question. So our next question is from a person who is in New England. Utilities get paid for infrastructure work like cutting down trees so they can't fall in lines. They do not get paid for guaranteed return on grid edge integration. how do we make it economical for utilities to take advantage of the existing capacity on the grid? Anyone want to finally solve this long-standing issue?
So I'm not going to solve this issue in this statement. But what we've seen in markets outside of the US, and I know that you're in New England, so this is a bit different, but outside of the US and in markets like Texas, the person who provides your energy is a retailer. And then there's, in the US, you have this vertically integrated space. So your retailer is the person who goes all the way up potentially to the generation of the energy or power. And in a deregulated space, the retailers actually have a relationship with what is called the DNO, or distribution network operators. And there are financial incentives to be able to bid in capacity into these markets. So, but I don't know if I have a very strong stance on if regulated or deregulated is the right thing, but that is a financial solution that is operating in other markets. And it is a way for your retailer, your utility, to benefit from the capacity that they know they have available.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And that happens to some degree with partially deregulated or deregulated markets in the US as well. I mean, Texas, I think, is a prime example. But I would also add, too, that, there's an inherent amount of risk in the utility space. And, like just building large power plants these days, seeking rate recovery, rate cases are increasingly controversial, and for very good reason. Folks are feeling that pinch every month when they pay their power bill. And, there's not that guaranteed rate of return, I would say, anymore for utilities the way that there maybe used to be. Regulators are increasingly questioning utilities when they come before them. And, through integrated resource planning, distributed system planning, other sorts of planning documents, really pushing utilities to think more about how they avoid capital spend and save money for ratepayers. And so, again, with that regulatory pressure, with the pressure from just their own consumers and prosumers and ratepayers, utilities are going to, I think, be forced to the table, whether or not, they're not naturally there, maybe from an economic incentive perspective. So,
really, really appreciate you tackling that tough question. Another tough question, which I feel like we have not really covered thus far, is data centers. So we have a question from an audience member who said, I've seen proposals that data centers could help meet or offset their energy needs by paying to install DERs in households. Is there some business model that could make that feasible? Is there anything you all are doing or seeing or have any interest in trying to tackle this huge data center issue that we're really seeing?
We are looking into it. So I think there's a previous thought that data centers were not flexible because they needed to be up at all times. If you think about flexibility, you move the kind of consumption up and down. And there was this previous thought that said they're always on, so you can't turn them off or you can't flex them down. That thinking has changed. And so there are companies like us, and I'm sure companies all around the world, trying to figure this out because it is a massive problem. So while I don't have the exact solution here, we do think that now data centers can be flexible, which would be a huge impact across the world and especially across the United States. And it's something that I know is very top of mind for many companies today. Not only companies like Kraken or utilities, but actually the companies building these data centers as well, because this is a really big financial impact for them.
Yeah, I agree that the data centers can help drive DERs because of their need for uptime or desire. They basically could have, they're a prime candidate for what we'd call C&I customer, where they want dedicated resources that aren't interrupted. Like if you're in California here and they have a fire, all of a sudden the grid goes down, and this is a problem for data centers. And the same way around the world. And they also need the lowest cost. So sometimes they're located next to hydro plants because they get really low cost energy. So if you can basically use the combination of DERs, which have low cost renewable energy and basically more climate resiliency, and located directly close to, of course, you need batteries in this case, to the data center itself. It's a prime candidate for DERs, but not residential DERs. In this case, it would be more the commercial, industrial, larger scale DERs. But still, they're located right there at the data center and can really meet this need.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. So unfortunately, we are at the top of the hour, or at the half hour. So I just want to, first of all, thank our panelists for this wonderful discussion. Thank you so much to our audience members for all of these wonderful questions as well. And thank you so much for Kraken for sponsoring this conversation. I feel like it's been really fantastic to get all these diverse perspectives from each of you. I think we each are located in a very specific niche as a part of the DER transition. And I just want to say thank you so much. And thank you, Canary Media.
Thank you.